Hi, Jeanette. Welcome to the AlzAuthors podcast. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And Christy, it's so good to have you on the podcast today as well.
Yep, always excited to be here. And Jeanette, really delighted to meet with you. I love children's books, so I am excited to interview you and hear about your book. Well, thank you.
Well, I want to let everybody know, all the listeners know, that I picked up your book on Kindle and it was only $1.99. So there's no reason not to download it. And it is so beautiful and moving. And it was very moving to me because I am an Italian American. And we have had many, many meatballs in my life. And it meant a lot to me just reliving that whole process since as far back as I can remember of making the meatballs and sauce and pasta and all of that. So thanks for putting that together and for sharing your experience as a child witnessing your grandfather's decline. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that was for you?
Absolutely. I was about 10 when, he started to decline. And then later in my late teens, early 20s, my grandmother was never diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She had a, unspecified form of dementia. Um, So, I was never in the caregiver role, but I remember just bits and pieces of how it affected our family. And the main thing was there was so many extra logistics that the grown-ups had to always take into account. It wasn't very much, there was less spontaneity whenever we were trying to get together we tried to still do all of our yearly events, our birthdays and Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving. But now we had to plan for, who was going to pick up grandma and grandpa? What were they, where were they going to stay? How are we going to get them home? How are we going to make sure that, grandpa was getting the rest that he needed? And then, as time went on, it became too much for my grandmother to care for my grandfather. And so then it became a question of how do, we still keep this very tight family structure, but make sure safety is in place. They ended up moving in with one of my aunts and uncles, and we all did try to take time to bring them to other people's houses, but keep routines consistent. So there's just so much logistics I would overhear planning for that weren't there before, and I know is very stressful on all the grown-ups. I wasn't really part of those decisions, obviously. Well, and I really appreciate you sharing that because I think that, a dementia diagnosis does impact the whole family. And if you have multiple generations that interact a lot, you're going to see this. And what you're talking about is something that is so real that all the changes in our routines and how we do things, holidays, all of this, we have to shift a little bit because we have to accommodate a little differently. And so I find it so interesting that you saw this as a child. And
Mhm.
my kids were younger when my parents were diagnosed with dementia, so they saw these things too. And the impact on kids is real. They see it, they feel it, and even if they don't know exactly what's going on, something's something's working for them in their brains as they're watching this. So it's a great
Yeah.
story that way. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I do have to say, I have to give so much credit to my parents and my aunts and uncles for how they still that it was obvious that grandma and grandpa were still valued, but still treasured, still such a part of our lives, like how they really tried to walk that balance. So yeah, great.
Mhm.
And, can you tell us a little bit about how you found your illustrator and how because it's so beautifully written and you bring in so many great things, and then the illustrations really accentuate the whole story. Oh my goodness. I Jacqueline Sinquet is possibly one of my favorite humans alive. She brought this story to life. I did not find her. My editor, so this is traditionally published, which means Two Lions Press, quote unquote, bought the book. And then they kind of took it through the whole process, and I got to basically be on the sidelines being like, yes, I like that idea. So, um, they found her and she really connected with the story. You know, she had experiences in her own family. Obviously, I can't speak to them, but she had very similar experiences in her own family, both with the cooking and both with the multi generations and how dementia had affected her life. And so she just, I think, poured her heart and soul into those illustrations. And I'm so thankful for how she did that. One of my favorite things is actually the second to last spread was her idea, and I'll put it up here. I won't give away the ending, but she in the original manuscript, there were words on this page, and she's like, I want it to just be a pause. Like I want it to just show the hope and the waiting. And I was like, "Brilliant, do it."
Yeah.
So, I almost feel like I can't even take credit for part of this story because of how much she put into it.
That's beautiful, and it is such a lovely book, and I noticed that. That's just a great way to have that happen.
Mhm. So it's available in Kindle, and is it paperback and hardback?
Right now, it's just hardback, Kindle, Amazon, but you can get it really through any bookstore. If they don't have it on their shelf,
Mhm.
feel free to ask them to order it in, support your independent bookstores. Something I always tell people also is it's easy for libraries to get it. If your local library doesn't have it, um, just ask them. Usually they order it right in. So
Yeah, that's great. That's really wonderful. I also read it on Kindle, so I feel like that's so accessible for people. You can carry around 1,000 books, but I also really love to hold a book. So it's great to know that you have it out there that way. That's perfect, and it's great for kids because they want to be able to turn the pages and they want to, hold it, and that's really important. So that's great. It's
yeah, it's
wonderful.
wonderful that it's in both formats. It makes life easy for people, I feel like.
Mhm. Sure does. Yeah.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about any other experiences you have in the dementia world or what you're doing? Like, what do you do right now? And how is this all fitting together for you?
You know, right now, I am probably a little bit more removed from it. I've been trying to find some ways to get involved in we have a local, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head right now, but a local chapter with the Alzheimer's Association. My difficulty is being a very busy mom and a teacher, finding the time to do that. Um, my family right now, I live pretty far from them. Um, but as much as possible, we try to stay in touch. For a while, I had been trying to call my uncle on a regular basis who's now going through this, but unfortunately, he's becoming less and less verbal. So, I need to be better about remembering to support my aunt who
Mm.
is his caregiver, and my cousins. They've been a huge support with this book, and I know that they really connect to it with their children and their grandchildren.
Well, and I think, and you told us you were a kindergarten teacher, which I
Oh,
think brilliant, right? Because really the first, not really not always the first. Sometimes kids have earlier educators, but oh my gosh, what you do in kindergarten is amazing. And so I can feel that in your writing that you really know how to speak to children, and I think that's a really important piece.
yeah, I try this book especially, I have other manuscripts hopefully, down the road, but I try to make it very interactive.
Hmm.
And when I
Hmm.
do readings, I actually bring along a whole little play-based learning set of spaghetti and meatball.
Oh
So,
wow!
yeah, I have, kinetic sand that we could pretend is the meat and they can roll it, and I have tomatoes that plop. I found them on Amazon, and they're filled with water and could dump the can in just like in the book, and I have pretend seasonings and eggs that crack and put out like a little felt yolk. So,
Wow.
uh,
Adorable.
yeah.
That's really great. That's great learning. See, it takes an educator. I just want to
Mhm.
say, you guys know
But,
what you're doing.
and that's what really the heart of this book is that involvement. The grandpa in the story is obviously not really remembering the steps, so everybody is helping him do it. And so, I mean, you have to do that when you're reading the book as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's terrific. That's really great.
Yeah.
Um,
What made you decide to write the book at this time in your life?
I I the the story goes, when I went back to teaching, I had stayed home with my kids. I went back to teaching, and I was looking for a hobby, and I thought, "I love reading children's books. I should try writing children's books." And so then the world shut down for a pandemic, and I thought, well, instead of just writing children's books, let's see how we can publish children's books. And originally, this story was only like a little poem about the spaghetti and meatball process. And one of my critique partners encouraged me to really go deeper and dig into my family experiences. And that's kind of where it clicked together. And, you know, one of the things I believe very strongly about kids is, they cannot fix every world problem. They're not going to necessarily find a cure for Alzheimer's. They're not right now, maybe one day, but the little things that they can do to support their family, to be present, those make a big difference. And so that was kind of the all those things that I tried to bring together into this book, those intergenerational relationships and hope, determination, because, if we can build that into kids when they're very young, when they get older into harder circumstances, they'll carry that with
yes, so true. And so that was the other thing that I thought was so beautiful is the interaction between, the grandmother and the little girl, and just that relationship was it was very clear that the relationship was really important to everyone, and that was so beautiful, really perfect.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about your grandfather and what kind of a man he was and your relationship?
Oh, I love to. Um, he was first generation Italian American, born in the country. If I remember correctly, I believe some of his siblings were actually born in Italy. He was a hard worker. He, his brother owned a furniture shop. He worked there until he retired. He was he met my grandmother, as a door-to-door furniture salesman of sorts, and somehow impressed her and sold himself. So, um, they, both of them were bilingual, Italian Americans, and I always asked them to teach me more Italian, to teach me more Italian, but really they wanted their generation just wanted English in the households, although I would pick up quite a few phrases from them arguing. So, you see some of that in the book. Grandpa, before he started to decline, um, y the grandchildren were the light of his world. He would come into a room and, he would be singing, "Here she comes, Miss America," like, as we'd come down the hallway, and, um, he would sneak us off to the side and, like, hand us a couple dollar bills, he was just that kind of fun person. Um my grandmother was very spirited. She was liked to be in control. She liked to have fun. Even when my grandfather started to decline, she was very active. She made sure that he was as active as he was able. Um, she loved to tell stories and laugh. I just remember there being a lot of joy and laughter and fun around them. That of course became blanketed with stress down the road, but I really hold on to those good times. That's my memories of my grandparents. And my grandmother, it has to be meatballs for grandpa because my grandmother, she could cook like you wouldn't believe, but baking, we didn't we didn't really trust her with the cookies or pies.
That's funny.
That's so funny.
Um, well, I know we'd like to hear some of your books. So if you would like to read a passage for us, that would be terrific. And then we have some other thoughts we'd like to share too.
Sure. All right. So, on the days we make meatballs for Grandpa, my feet lie at my grandparents' driveway. Grandma squishes me in a giant heart, but sadness pokes through my smile when Grandpa looks at me without knowing who I am. Don't worry, Felicia, Grandma says. Taste and smell are all we need. For the meatballs? I ask. Both. She winks. I kiss Grandpa on the cheek and tell him I love him. To voglio bene? Anch'io, he whispers. Deep down, I know he loves me too, but it sounds more like a question. It's neither, Bubudo. He's called me that for as long as I can remember, but I have to remind him now. And that is my grandfather's actual nickname of me. I don't know what it means, and I don't know why he called me that, but that's what I could always expect. Would you like more, or is that good?
No, I think that's lovely.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
beautiful.
it was beautiful. It's just so it's so beautifully illustrated. So for those of you listening, I encourage you, like Marianne said, it's on Kindle. It's a hardback, so pick that up. It's really great. Um, so Jeanette, if somebody asked you today, or somebody said to you today, "My loved one has dementia," what would be your response?
My response would be to ask them how they are doing. Um, with most kinds of illnesses, uh, the risk, that there's always a risk of death, of decline, of that hard step with Alzheimer's and dementia. You almost lose the person before you lose the person, and it's just a more complicated part of grief, and that caregiver really needs um, people to support them. It's a very confusing and hard time to balance that.
Yeah, I that's so true. And as Marianne and I talk to many authors and other people who are going through this, we hear that all the time. And it's that anticipatory grief that you have. Your person is still there, but you're grieving the loss of lots of little things, and it's hard to manage. And I think what's beautiful is that you're sharing this about how kids feel it too. That your character says, I know he remembers, but it's hard for her a little bit. And she comes to understand what's happening. So that's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think knowing what's going on with another person, that's such a great point. Like, how are you doing? Um, we always want to focus on the other person, the person who's ill, but the caregiver is on a journey as well. So
Yeah.
important. So important. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was the most frightening thing about your grandfather's or your grandmother's dementia? I mean, you experienced both at different stages in life.
I think, as a child, realizing that we were starting to have to care for him. Um, especially because I was 10, so I was still very young. And as I got older, that was less unsettling. You kind of got used to it. Um, Also, cognitively, as you're a teenager, you're able to take on more responsibility. But, as a 10-year-old, you're supposed to be the one cared for. They're supposed to be babysitting you. But just knowing that they weren't quite okay. They weren't quite able to do that. That was hard. That was scary as a child. Not really being able to play cards with him the way we used to play cards and that sort of thing. Um, Also making sure I didn't do the wrong thing to confuse him. You wanted to make somebody feel comfortable and happy, But I didn't really know how to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. It can be so confusing when you're a child. And as you say, and you kind of allude to, that developmental process changes, right? So as you get older, you not only can you take on more responsibilities, but your ability to kind of understand more complex kinds of things becomes more apparent to you, and you can do that. So I think that's really important. What do you wish people who have not encountered dementia in their lives knew about the disease?
To hold on to the good times. You know, it, even when you ask me about my grandparents, my memories of them are those good moments. Like, obviously, honor how tough the season is, but remember that that person was a treasured part of your family. And how they're acting now is going to be hard. It's going to take work, but they are valuable and they deserve dignity. And you deserve to have those memories be at the forefront of your mind, even though you might not be able to make more of the same kind of memories.
Yeah.
Good advice. Can we talk a little bit about kids in the kitchen?
Absolutely.
I've shared with you how I have in common with you growing up in an Italian American household, and making meatballs and sauce was like the Sunday activity.
Mhm.
And when my mom was growing up, her mother, I never allowed her to go near the stove or taught her how to cook or did any of that. I don't know why, but she determined she was not going to do that to me. So at a very young age, I was, by her side on the chair at the stove, helping to pulverize the tomatoes and making meatballs. And I, was in high school, I think, when I was put together my very first dinner on my own. But, that was, like, such a great time, and created such a strong bond with my mother. And, um, a lot of kids today, I don't know how much exposure they really have in the kitchen. A lot of families, they don't cook. A lot of families eat out or order in. So, let's share your thoughts on that, especially as a parent and as a teacher, about having kids help out in the kitchen.
I think kids rise to the level of responsibility you give them.
Mhm.
Um, and I think cooking in is such a bonding experience. It is obviously not something a toddler can accomplish on their own, but there's always something you can find for them to do, whether their high chair is right there and they're pretending, or once they are walking and able to put things into a pot, teaching them this is hot, don't touch this. They learn it very quickly. Um, uh, Baking, I love to bake. I know I told you my grandmother was not the baker, she was the cook. But my own mother and her mother were quite the bakers, so I kinda got both of them. And my daughter would and my son would scoop and measure, and we learned counting. There are so many things kids learn in cooking, and then they become a little bit more adventurous in what they're willing to try in terms of food. And it's such a sensory experience. They see things, they hear things, they taste things. It opens up time for conversation. I am a big fan of kids in the kitchen, and I remember when, I posted this book in one of my writers group for critique, somebody asked, "Would a kid really do these things?" I don't know if that's realistic. I'm like, "My kids have been doing it for years." At this point, I
Mhm.
could probably turn my daughter loose, my 13-year-old loose, and she could probably make the spaghetti and meatballs on her own with just a little bit of help
Mhm.
from, because there's no recipe other than the one that I had to figure out to write into the book. So, um, but yeah, I think kids should always be given a shot and just taught the right way to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, and the recipe for the meatballs and the sauce is in the book.
It is.
So you'll when you buy the book, you'll be able to use Jeanette's recipes to make your meal.
And the funny story about that is none of us can find a recipe that my grandmother had, which is,
Mhm.
one of the little threads through the book. Taste and smell are all we need.
Mhm.
And I'm sure she had one, but she never used it. I've never actually used a recipe.
Mhm.
So when putting that recipe in the book, I actually had to make a pot of sauce and kind of figure out, okay, how much do I actually use, how much
Right.
well actually is going into this thing, because I just dump things in, I taste it, and if I need more, I put more. So
Yeah, well, that's how we did it.
So I'm an Irish person, so we did not have a lot of
We did not
meatballs,
have
but we
that.
did make spaghetti. Okay, so we definitely had spaghetti. And I'll tell you, for me, it was chili. My mother had a chili recipe. Again, not written down. And I learned it just the way you're talking about, Jeanette. It was it was about the smell, it was about the taste. I actually really loved how you put in your book about the sizzle of the garlic and when you know that cooking is, like you said, multisensory, then you start paying attention to those kinds of things. So, teaching my kids how to make chili, it always tasted very much the same, but there was always a little something different because maybe I added a little this time or a little that this time or something. Maybe I'd put beef and pork in there or no meat or whatever. Just we would always play with it. I don't know how chili became our thing, but that was like the family recipe that passed on. And my kids have both asked for it, and I've had to kind of write it down, but they've made it with me so they can see how what the process is. So we would get stewed tomatoes, but we would crush them in our hands. So it was very our hands were in the pot before we threw in the beans and the meat and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a fun time to do that with your kids, and they do like to help out, and that's encouraging that is great because eventually they're going to have to feed themselves somewhere.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right.
That's great.
So I to mention that in our collection of more than 350 books, we have a cookbook for caregivers by Melissa Bernstein, who is an occupational therapist. So, if listeners are interested in working in the kitchen, not only with kids, but with their loved one with dementia, that is another resource. And what are your thoughts about working with people in the kitchen with dementia? I know there are people who are afraid to have that. They're afraid that the person might be injured or might cause some kind of a problem, a catastrophe in the kitchen. But many people have found, like just like with children, that having that interaction, that time together, focusing on a project, having conversation, that's the point of it all. What do you think about that?
Obviously it's going to be personal for every situation and follow doctor's advice. But
Always.
I remember my grandfather sitting there in the kitchen with us as we did cooking all the time. Even if he was, the real grandfather was not much of a, but he was always there and he would talk and he might not know exactly what's going on around him, but he would sneak bits to eat. Um, and you have to rely on what you know about their personality, and their capabilities. But if if somebody wants to do something and can do it, I think it's a great experience, and it does have that power. You're probably not going to get the happy ending like in the book, but it does have that power to 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 bring you together just a little bit more. Um, and it's a different kind of memory you're creating now. So yeah.
It
Yeah,
depends on their stage too, some
exactly.
people might be able to do more and others, my mother-in-law, her mother had Alzheimer's and she used to take a basket of laundry, like towels or something, and pop it on, dump it out on her lap and tell her to stop folding. So to keep her busy and to make her feel like she was doing something useful. And then when she would finish with it, put it aside and then a few minutes later, take the whole thing again, dump it in her lap again. So, I mean, you can do things like that too in the kitchen, like sorting things
Yeah.
and things that are not going to be make any real impact on the recipe or anything, but just to make them feel like they're a part of it. I did share earlier when we were talking before we started the recording. My mom, as I mentioned, she was the meatball lady. Everywhere she went, whenever she was invited to a party or whatever, there always was a request to bring a pot of meatballs. She was known for that. And then as she got older, she lived to be 91. She kind of didn't really want to do meatballs anymore. But we did a party for her her 91st. And as we were getting everything ready in the house, she was sitting at the kitchen table and she was all excited. She says, "What can I do? How can I help?" I said, "You can make the meatballs." So I put the bowl and we put the ingredients and let her make the meatballs. And I mean, she was so happy. And actually, the last really great photo I have of her was taken at that time.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, up until the very end, she was still making the meatballs.
Yeah. And it's keeping those memories, if you're approaching it not like, "Do you remember how to do this? Do you remember," being kind and connecting and allowing them to do what they can do. And then, of
Mhm.
course, being safe, right? Like, I'm and Marianne, you're absolutely correct. I think, what stage is somebody in, right? My mom was still cooking, when she had early stages of Alzheimer's, but by the end, she really couldn't do as much, and she didn't need to. She was eventually in a memory care facility. I know a lot of people who do give buckets of towels for someone to fold, just an occupation, and so people are happy to have something to do, and
Yeah.
but I think the sensory piece is so important. So I think, Jeanette, you are onto something really big here. It's not
Yep.
it's great for the kids and it's great for all the generations and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
wonderful.
And obviously, I'm not a scientist, but I know smells and sounds are really linked to different kinds of memories, and that's
Right.
important. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
making of the meatballs and doing the tomatoes and everything is very tactile. And I think it brings back muscle memory.
Yep.
Like people
Yeah.
just know what to do when you're given
Yeah.
like a bowl of ground beef with eggs and breadcrumbs and seasonings and maybe some milk in it. They know that they're supposed to stick their hands in
That's
it, not
that's
mushing
actually
it
one of
up.
one of my favorite. I have so many favorite pages, but when they roll the meatball,
Yeah.
Yes.
remember that page?
Yes.
The grandpas look like snowballs, and we laugh that some things never change.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so it was, yeah, kind of a nod to both my father and my grandfather.
That's great. And there were so many little touches in there that I really appreciated. I appreciated the stale bread and maybe that was in the recipe, but it was how you talked about that to make the breadcrumbs. And when that was the other recipe that was very passed on from my mom to me and my sister was making the turkey dressing. We would save the ends of the loaf of bread for like a month before in the freezer, but then we'd defrost them and then we'd have other kinds of bread that we'd leave out for a couple days, and that's how we made the stuffing. So it was just a different feel to the bread, but
Yeah.
all those
Mm.
things are really interesting. Yeah.
And people in that era, the grandparents' era, my mom's or your parents' era too, Christy, is, they had to have economy. There was no
Mhm.
wasting,
Oh
especially
no.
of food
Yeah.
and ingredients and stuff too. So they brought all of that, which is interesting. I always like to think about like the eras that they lived in because it was a way different time than it is
Yes.
for
Yeah.
us.
Right. I mean, oh my gosh, you were saying people sometimes order out. We never ordered out. I mean, it was an extreme luxury to have pizza delivered, you know? Oh my gosh, why
Yeah.
would you do that? And
Yeah.
now, I mean, in my little cul-de-sac, there's somebody dropping something off to somebody somewhere every night.
Yes. People were more self-sufficient, you
Yeah.
had to be.
Yeah. So, I mean, if nothing else, I think it's great. I just love so much about this book. And again, I told you I love children's books. I think getting kids
Mhm.
interested in doing that. So I wanted to ask, when you were writing it, did you read it to your children and did they give any feedback or
I
input?
I did, and they don't think that they gave me much feedback other than like kind of popping in and out of my critique groups and telling me that they liked it. But yeah, I did read it to them. I can't honestly remember if they had me change anything specific or whatnot.
Yeah.
So,
But it's great. It's great. You got their input. That's great that they got to
yeah.
hear it. How do they feel about the book? Are they excited about it?
They are excited. They love the fact that mom's an author, but they're simultaneously, I think, a little like embarrassed to ask their school librarians to, because I've got my daughter is in middle school, so she's kind of like, Mom, it's not the kind of book we'd have in the library. And I'm like, "That's fair." My son's the same way. But my daughter comes to all of my book signings with me. She is such an avid reader. So she just loves being there, and she's a very outgoing person. So, I'm outgoing, but I'm a little bit more shy than she is. So I always bring her to kind of help me get into the groove.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Do you have more books that you're going to be working on, or what's to come from you?
I have another book coming out with the Little Press. It's called Duck Duck Groove, and it has a completely different vibe than this one. Um, and then I have a portfolio full of manuscripts. The sad situation is my agent actually passed away suddenly of a heart attack last fall. And so, I just took a little bit of time to kind of get my feet back under me. It was such a sudden thing. And she was a lovely person. Her name's Dawn Dowdle. And she was just such a champion. I remember her voice when she got the offer for this manuscript, just how happy. I mean, she was another person that was really a champion for it. Um, so, right now I'm kind of starting back querying more agents to see if there's, I feel like I sold, like my best book is out there. Stop trying to, I'm trying to compete with that. Um, so my hope is that there will be more down the road because I do have quite the file. You just have to find the right match. I know some people are such geniuses at self-publishing, but for me as a teacher, that whole world seems very overwhelming, and so I like the process of I'm working with somebody who's going to kind of then take it for me, and then I can take a back seat to it.
Oh,
So,
for sure.
Mhm.
That's
yeah.
great.
That's wonderful. And how can people find the book and how do they find you on the World Wide Web?
Yeah. Well, the good news is my maiden name, Fazzari, Fazzari. There are very few of us. So if you Google Jeanette Fazzari, most likely I will be at the top of that list. Um, but I have a website, and um, it's case sensitive. So it's bit.ly/ and then just my name in all lowercase, Jeanette Fazzari Jones. But again, Google and I'll pop up. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. I love to message and email with people. I'm very open. Friends from back home will mail me their copy of the book and I'll sign it for them. I just love connecting with people. Selling books is great, but it's not about that for me. It's about, readers gaining something from literature. I feel like books are just so special. Everybody can get something from a book to help them where they are in life. And so that's
Yeah.
that's what's important for me as an author.
Yeah, you said it. That's what
That's
we're all
great.
about is, connecting people going through a really hard time with resources that will help guide them on their journeys and offer them comfort and support as well. So
Yeah.
books they're the perfect vehicle for that.
And it's great you have wonderful last name that people can find right off. You got SEO built into your maiden name. It's fantastic. And and you're on all the socials, so we'll be sure to follow and that's great to know.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us or things that you would like to share with us?
Well, I mean, I'm just so thankful to have gotten involved and gotten to learn about you more. Especially as my family is going through this with a new generation, it'll be a help to be able to put them in contact with your resources and just what a wonderful thing you're doing to support people going through a really difficult time.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your contribution to it too, because again, it is a family, it impacts the whole family. So it's wonderful to bring in all the voices and be able to support kids along the way too. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Have a great day.
You're welcome. Bye.
Hi, it's Mary Ann with exciting news. AlzAuthors has published a brand new anthology, Poetry for the Dementia Journey, now available in ebook and paperback through Amazon. Within its pages, you'll discover a variety of voices writing about the diversity of dementia care experiences, caring for a mother or father or spouse, witnessing the decline of a sibling, reflections on the time before the diagnosis, the years of care, and the aftermath. Poetry provides us with a meaningful way to explore our experience and emotions regarding dementia and to express ourselves when we encounter the many different joys and dilemmas caregiving can bring. You'll find details on how to order the book in the show notes. Please remember to leave a review on the book sales page once you've read it. Reviews do help boost a book's visibility and helps readers find it. Thank you for your support of our efforts to erase the silence and stigma that often accompany a dementia diagnosis.
Caregiving is a challenge, whether your person has dementia or not. Finding helpful tips and learning new strategies from people in the know is critical. That's why we at AlzAuthors love the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast from Elizabeth Miller, who also happens to be an AlzAuthor. Elizabeth speaks from experience and has important and often fun conversations with other caregiving experts and professionals. And we appreciate learning tips on self-care, discovering new resources, and feeling empowered to support ourselves as caregivers. You can find the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast wherever you download your favorite podcasts, or visit the website happyhealthycaregiver.com.